Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event today for the Northwest and the Plains Vivid user groups, protecting business continuity with a remote workforce using Micro Focus LoadRunner. We appreciate you being here today. This event is, go ahead to the next slide when you can, Julio, there you go. It is brought to you again by those couple larger user groups, since we're able to go virtual and these are not face-to-face, so we did broaden the audience, and also Micro Focus. And today actually will be moderated. This is Terry Sorello with Vivid, but Ray Rivas is coming back on. He was having some issues in the very beginning, but Ray will be our moderator. You'll hear him towards the end as we start to discuss the question and answer session.
Hi, Terry.
Ray, oh, there you are. Awesome. If you don't mind, Ray, I'll let you take it over.
Okay, not at all. I'm sorry about the technical difficulties on my end, but I want to introduce myself. I'm Ray Rivas. I'm with iDeliver Technologies, and we're a specialist, platinum partner for Micro Focus in the ADM workspace. And we have been in business for, this is our 12th year in business as iDeliver, but I personally have worked with these products since 1998, back when it was WindRunner and LoadRunner just starting out. But I remember the introduction of Quality Center and many other products going forward, including the changes that were done to LoadRunner. But I wanted to also let you know that iDeliver is specializes in this area too, and we have several unique offerings. As well as being a platinum partner for resale, we're also a platinum partner for support, which means we will do your level 1 support and provide you very quick service, personalized service, and we also do virtual administration of your products, so that if you want to have us administer your products, set them up, run them for you, customize them and those sorts of things, and even do your upgrades, we can do all of that remotely for you as a separate service. We also provide additional services for testing and setting up centers of excellence. We do testing with the LoadRunner, and we can set up to do that remotely for you, so that you can test any of your applications there. But if you want more information, please feel free to reach out to me. Next slide, please. Our two speakers today will be Julio Arteaga and Petar Puskarik, and they're both, Julio is with Micro Focus. He's a specialist in the ADM products, very well versed in the products. Petar is a longtime user of the products, and he's a performance engineering SIG leader for Vivid. So he's got his finger on the pulse of what's going on from the user group perspective with the LoadRunner and the other performance tools in the area in general, but he specializes in that and uses it on a regular basis. So he'll be able to tell us a lot more about what's going on there. Next slide, please. Live sessions being recorded, and of course that will be available to all Vivid members. So when you registered, if you also created a Vivid membership for yourself, which is free, it's gratis, please look for the website and you'll be able to see the recording of the session. And one other thing I wanted to mention is there is a Q&A pane, a questions pane, and if you look to the right, or at least it's to the right on my screen, for GoToWebinar, there's a pane and there's a section that talks about questions. Here's a picture of it. You can toggle into this view, and if you go into the questions pane, you can enter a question and we will answer it at the end of the webinar. We're going to have special Q&A time for that. Next slide, please. So now we're going to go on and go ahead and begin the webinar. We've gotten all the housekeeping taken care of. If there's some other questions that come up, please feel free to enter them into the questions pane, and I'll either type back to you or in a private chat, or we'll answer them at the end of the webinar. So let me introduce Petar to start off. Or Julio, do you want to start with the demo?
Yes, yeah, I'll start.
Okay, let's start with Julio with the demo, and then following that, we'll have Pitar talk about practical applications that he's used in his company to use the product. So Julio, take away with the demo, please.
Great, thanks, Ray. And actually, I'm going to start with a couple of slides, right? Talk about the solution overall and what we're really addressing with the LoadRunner family of products. Just by quick way of introduction. So as was mentioned, I've been around for quite some time. I started back in Mercury back in 2000. So I've been around the tools for quite some time, and I've seen them really grow and expand and gone through a lot of great changes, right? So on the screen, you see a brief agenda of what we're going to be talking about today. And really, we're talking about the LoadRunner family of solutions. Specifically, we're talking about business continuity and making sure that end users are having the right experience when it comes to our applications, especially given that a lot of what happens today is really remote work that's being done by the end user community. Specifically, we'll drill down into network virtualization. It's a really great feature that's available across the entire portfolio. But let's go ahead and get started with what we bring to the table as far as a solution. So this slide, I always like to bring it up because we've gone through a little bit of a name change, right? We have a long history in the performance space, and today we've branded everything as a LoadRunner platform. So on the left-hand side, you see where it used to be LoadRunner Performance Center or StormRunner Load. Today, everything has been rebranded to be the LoadRunner family of products. So LoadRunner Professional, which is really one of our flagship products that's been around for many, many years. It's really where our performance testing started back in the Mercury days, is the on-premise solution. LoadRunner Enterprise is a global footprint for your performance testing, and LoadRunner Cloud is your global space for that particular platform. So when we look at the family, this is the way it looks today, right, with Professional, Enterprise, Cloud. But on the right-hand side, I'm going to talk about briefly also something called LoadRunner Developer. And LoadRunner Developer really represents a great new way for the development community or the dev testers to be involved as part of the testing process. LoadRunner Developer lets you create a virtual user or a script in the context of a development environment. So you're working with Eclipse, Visual Studio, IntelliJ, and you're doing these things using JavaScript. So these are tools that the developers are familiar with. They're not using anything proprietary. So that's kind of why it's a little bit towards the right there, right? But the actual platforms that we host all these different performance testing assets is Professional, Cloud, and Enterprise. So let's look a brief look into each one of these different platforms, right? So Professional, as I said, has been around for quite some time. It's really the solution that a lot of the other solutions are based on. So it is the driving engine for your performance testing. It's really linked or tied to one particular location or one campus. The end users are typically located in where the application resides, where the controllers and load generators and all these different assets reside, right? So they're directly linked to that space. Whereas LoadRunner Enterprise represents the global perspective of performance testing. That means that your testers could be located anywhere around the world, right? So they don't need to worry about breaking any license agreements or having to be physically in front of a machine to kick off a test. They can be located anywhere in the world. It's completely web enabled, so they can manage those test cases, those assets, those scripts, those scenarios, and collect the results from one single repository. And by the way, that also applies to the administrators of the platform. They're doing everything from a single pane of glass, so you don't have to physically be in front of a machine. So patches, applying patches and fixes and rebooting machines and so on can be done readily from the LoadRunner Enterprise space. Now, LoadRunner Professional and LoadRunner Enterprise, right, have a long history, right? Performance Center was what we used to call LoadRunner Enterprise, and those are things that are managed by customers. So you're managing these load generators and these controllers and all these different things that belong to you directly, right? So you're responsible for updating operating systems or applying patches for the operating system. You're responsible for making sure that security settings are all properly configured and so on and so forth. Most recently, however, we released LoadRunner Cloud. LoadRunner Cloud really represents a complete new revolution into performance testing in that, as the name implies, everything happens from within the cloud. That means your load generators are located in the cloud. That means controllers are located in the cloud. They're managed by us, by Micro Focus. So any patching, any security settings, anything that has to be taken care of as far as maintenance is done by Micro Focus. So it really removes the headache out of the administration of this platform. The nice thing, however, is that you also have the option of having on-premise load generators for applications that are not accessible from outside the firewall. So you can mix and match these things and really make it into a complete center of excellence for your performance testing needs. In addition to that, and you're going to see this shortly, this one I'm going to use for my demo is LoadRunner Cloud. You're going to see how simple it is to set up a performance test, and run a performance test, and look at results. You know, the best way to explain this is that we're letting the machines do the work for us. So in the old days, right, performance testing was the kind of endeavor that you were looking for a needle in the haystack. You had to be familiar with log files, with databases, with the way operating systems worked, and so on and so forth. No longer the case, right? You pay for these platforms, you're paying maintenance. So let the software do the work for you. Let the software find the problem. Let it find that needle in the haystack and show you exactly where the problem lies. So LoadRunner Cloud is what I'll be showing you. LoadRunner Developer, again, you know, a kind of a different context in that it is way of the developer community being part of the testing process. And the reason I bring this up is because LoadRunner Developer is very important because, first of all, it's free. LoadRunner Developer is free for up to 50 virtual users. So if you're creating a small performance test locally, right, you're not even touching any of the bigger platforms, you're working completely locally on your machine, you're able to create a test for up to 50 virtual users. And it's a non-expiring license, right? It's readily available from the Micro Focus Marketplace, up to 50 virtual users using JavaScript. And this can be done from within an IDE. So if you're using Visual Studio, IntelliJ, Visual Studio Code, Eclipse, and so on, you're not limited to the IDE that you're using. So the perfect fit for this is the developer or the dev tester, right? Typically someone that's going to be shifted, you know, if you're shifting performance testing left, you need to get started earlier, you need to get started right away, but you don't want to use proprietary solutions like the virtual user generator. You can use what you currently are familiar with, which is your JavaScript and your IDEs as well. So again, this is downloadable today. It's 50 virtual users running locally. But the nice thing is that once this needs to go to the higher platform, to a true performance test, 500, 1,000 virtual users, you can take this script and upload it to whichever LoadRunner platform. So we support it across all the LoadRunner platforms, on Professional, on LoadRunner Enterprise, and LoadRunner Cloud as well. So very powerful features as well. Now, what do they all have in common, since we're talking about business continuity and especially the way things work today, right, with such a remote workforce? Performance testing has traditionally been something that takes advantage of whatever the network pipe is or whatever's available as far as bandwidth, right? So when you ran, let's say, for example, 1,000 virtual users and you had a full communications line available and a great network available to you, you know, it would just use that as the performance metrics. However, what is the challenge with that? Well, there's a lot of different devices today. Everybody has some form of mobile device. They're on some sort of a mobile network, right? 3G, 4G, 5G networks that exist out there. A huge portion of the workforce is now, you know, brings their own device to the workforce, right? So there's all these different variables that need to be accounted for. So how do you get over this? How do you test for these different conditions? Now, I'm going to be a little bit facetious for a second, right? You can certainly go out there and purchase, you know, a whole bunch of subscriptions for different mobile providers, AT&T, Verizon, a 3G network subscription, 4G, 5G, very expensive, obviously, right? And of course, you're paying these things on a continual basis. So network virtualization is very unique because it lets you test real world conditions by applying attributes to your network. What does that mean? Well, in simple terms, it means that your performance test can run as if it was running across a 3G network. It could run as if it was running across a 4G network. It could run as if it was running on a Wi-Fi network. And of course, you can apply no emulation at all and just take advantage of the entire pipeline or the entire bandwidth that's available for you. In addition to that, right, everybody has certain network conditions, certain characteristics for their corporate network. Things like drop rates, packet drop rates, and error conditions. You can bring those into network virtualization and apply those conditions to your network pipe. So ultimately, it's about seeing the various network conditions and being able to apply those and being able to measure what is the end user experience. What happens when a user logs in? Well, if you're testing strictly on a 5G network, login is going to look great. What happens to your 3G network, to the different folks that are logging into that network? Now, keep in mind, right, we're talking about business continuity. We're talking about the ability to keep our workforce happy and our users happy, but this really goes beyond that. Countless times I've spoken to customers that their brand is suffering because their applications, especially mobile applications, are out there and the reviews are terrible. So those are, word travels fast, unfortunately. We're all consumers. We book flights, we purchase things online, and quite often we talk to our friends and families and so on, and we say, well, I'm not going to book this. I'm not going to use this particular travel agency to book my travel anymore. They're very slow. Their application is never available, or it took me 30 seconds to log in. I'm going to move over to the competition. So you're not losing just from a reputation perspective. You're losing the brand recognition or the brand reputation as well, which will have a major impact on your business. So this is why network virtualization is such a huge part of performance testing today. So, it really could be the difference between a couple of seconds or 35 seconds. And a lot of times, right, what happens is we get comfortable. Well, we ran a test, we covered all the bases, right? The application looks great. However, once you're under load, you're testing and you're seeing 18-second response times. So a couple of graphs that shows you what typically happens, right? Here's response time without network virtualization. Life is great, less than 2 seconds, rather less than 10 seconds to log in. And that is because I'm testing what I think is going to be the right network conditions. What happens when I increase things to 500 or more virtual users? And by the way, these are actual results. These are based on screenshots from an analysis that we did. We see the response time is greater than 40 seconds. Why? Because we didn't account for a couple of things. One is the simple fact, right, that we have more users hitting the application. However, what we're noticing is that as the user traffic increases, things are getting worse. Where is the ceiling? Where is the high point? Where is where is our point to really determine where the problem is? Now, I'm going to step back and also say, well, what happens if our application is working perfectly well? Not the end of the story by any means. There's always room for improvement. In fact, I'm going to show you during the demo how an application that's working perfectly fine lets you be proactive. Don't be reactive, right? We don't want to be reactive and wait for that phone call for the the end user to say, well, I can't log in, or it's taking me 3 days to get a response back from an email or something to that effect. So you want to be proactive and be able to improve things and make things better. So some examples of where we can apply this. Well, the simple answer is across all LoadRunner platforms. And the great thing is that it's included. It's not a separate license. It's not something that you have to get a special key for. This is all inclusive, including the community edition of LoadRunner that's freely available. So, when you apply these network conditions, you can apply them either on a per script basis, or you can apply them at the load generator. So that means that anything that runs from that point is going to have those network conditions. So here, for example, you see 2 scripts. One is 3G busy, the other one is 3G typical. Even though there's very generic terms in the documentation, there are hard numbers tied to these words. So 3G busy is 200 milliseconds of response time. 3G typical is going to have less lag time when it comes to the application. So LoadRunner Enterprise, things become even easier because this is all done via the web. And again, this is it's not a programming exercise to set this up. It's more of a configuration exercise. It's a matter of determining, well, where do I want to run this from? Do I want to run it from individual scripts, right? So I can select a script and say, okay, I want you to apply these network conditions. I want you to apply a 3G network condition to this. Or do you want to make it something that sticks to the entire scenario as well? In LoadRunner Cloud, it becomes even more simple to do this, right? The reason being that it's included as part of the fabric. It's something that's automatically turned on, automatically configured for you. So as you're going to see in the demo, we're going to talk about results, right, when we get to the demo. You can split the traffic up by different locations, right? Virginia, California, Frankfurt, Oregon, Ireland, right? And then you can also apply network conditions to these different locations. So think about the power behind this. You're taking a scenario and you're basically saying, I want to run this as if it's coming from Virginia, or actually, well, I do want to run it from Virginia. However, I want to see what this looks like for my Wi-Fi customers. I want to see what it looks like for my 3G customers. I want to see what it looks like for my busy mobile device customers. In fact, one of the common demos that I do is I created something called Bad Network, which is a network that has like a 90% packet drop rate. Just so being silly, I said, what would happen if I had the worst network in the world that had modem speeds, right? If I ran this application. And it was really funny to see the massive spike in response time. So it becomes a very simple exercise. And even locally, VuGen has network virtualization capabilities. So you're entitled to use 2 network virtualization users for free with the community edition. And in VuGen, you can also produce a report that shows you what happens when you apply these network conditions as well to this. And then what you're going to see during the demo, I'm not going to drill too much into this here because I'd rather show it live. You can see the results. But you're going to see an NV Insights report. This report speaks volume. As I alluded to in the beginning of my presentation, I said, let the machines do the work for you, right? So the expectation is not for the user to go into a log file and try to break down the TCP headers and hope to see something that really points to the problem. Here, the problem stands out, what I like to call the sore thumb, right? It stands out like a sore thumb. It shows you, here is the problem. Here is a potential fix for your problem. So the machine is looking at the traffic, and it's basically giving you the advice of how potentially to fix this. And we'll drill down a little bit more into this. But we also have what I like to call a report card. This is the good, the bad, and the ugly. This is the I'll start with the good news on the bottom right. You got an A because, hey, this looks great. Your application is working well when it comes to delivering documents, HTML documents. You get a B. You're a little bit off, and you're getting a few too many 400, 500 status codes. D is get progressively worse, and of course, just like in school, you have an F. It says use domain sharding for desktops, and you get an F. That means it failed. What does that mean? In simple terms, it means that network virtualization looked at your traffic and analyzed the traffic and said, you know what? There's something wrong here that you could potentially fix by doing this, and you're going to see that as well. In fact, here's one of the suggestions, right? When you break it down, what can we do to fix this, right? And there's the advice. Now, a ton of information comes out of NV Insights. So you get things like a breakdown, a waterfall chart of what is the breakdown of the page. How much graphics are you downloading? How many PDFs are you downloading? And it's surprising when I talk to customers and ask them about the results because there's so many things that stand out. Most recently, we had a customer just saw a whole bunch of 404s, image not found. They had no idea that these things were happening in the background. Now, here's a funny thing, right? Here's to paraphrase the conversation, I said, well, what's the big deal? We have the fastest machines and things are great. That's great. Did you ever think about the processing power, the CPU power, which isn't free, that you're dedicating to serving up a 404, right? Or as I like to call it, hey, it's not there, so you're spending a lot of time doing nothing. So, it really makes for an interesting conversation when you look at these things. But this is the world we live in, right? Finding that needle in the haystack, or having the machines find those needle in the haystacks and show you the truth behind the scenes. Just a quick slide. And all these things that I'm showing you, they're available today. You can download the community edition of LoadRunner Professional. It doesn't expire. You're up to 50 virtual users that you can run across just about all the protocols. Network virtualization included as part of that as well. So definitely take advantage of that. Let's go to a demo. Let's talk about all these great things that we're talking about live. So I made the font specifically very large, so hopefully everybody can see it. But we're going to walk through the creation of a scenario because I want to show you how we take into consideration the remote users, right? How can we address the needs of the remote community? So this is LoadRunner Cloud. This is all things that are defined in the cloud, right? So my load generators, controllers, all those things are there, of course. They're just behind the cloud. However, here's the cool thing about LoadRunner Cloud is that I am not dealing with specific machines. I'm not dealing with a load generator with a label of AX001 ABC. I wouldn't know what that machine does. Where is that machine? Shouldn't have to be the case, right? It shouldn't be the case in the times we live today. So instead, I'm dealing with geolocations, North Virginia. Now I have 100 virtual users, just about, and I want to run these from different locations. So I'm going to pick London, Mumbai, And now I have 3 locations from where I am running my virtual users. Now, what's the impact of this? The impact of this is not so much what's there, what is not there. I'm not worrying about finding, locating a specific machine. We take care of that for you, right? All I know is that I want to run this from Mumbai. It could be 1 generator, it could be 10 generators. We automatically ramp up based on the number of virtual users. Next thing I want to do is, well, out of the traffic here, right? So I'm going to say 20% of my traffic is going to go from Virginia, 80% will go from Mumbai. Out of that 80%, what do I want to include in the emulation? This is where network virtualization comes in. Wi-Fi, I want to make 25% go over Wi-Fi. Mobile typical, I want 25%. I'm also going to add, here's my bad network, by the way, 45% packet loss. Yeah, I'd say it's time to call the network folks. This is something that I created custom, right? This is, I don't want to deal with, 3G busy. We don't have mobile customers. However, we do have a terrible network. So I can certainly add that, or I can define another one and include that as part of the scenario. Now, I'm going to go ahead and move on because this is, we want to take advantage of all the time that we have allotted to us. But this is the scenario as it runs for various geolocations. Once I run this, of course, we get a result set. This is where the real fun lies. Let's talk results, because that's why we're here. Now we have the technical results, the obvious stuff, right? That says, okay, here's our virtual users running. Here's our transaction response times, and so on and so forth. That's great. I want to see something a little bit different, though. Talk to me about the SLAs, service level agreements. How bad are we off to what we promised our customers, right? And here it is. Anything in the shaded area, that is an anomaly. That means that we strayed from the expectation of what we wanted to see as far as an SLA. Most importantly, though, look at all this information. The emulation, right? So Sao Paulo, Wi-Fi from Northern California. Right? Hopefully you can see it. The font is still a little bit small, but you can see that here we have 10 milliseconds from Northern California, Sao Paulo, about 4.8 seconds, right? So not too bad. Now look at Sao Paulo though, mobile busy, that's 13 seconds. Lets me be proactive. We can start looking at things from the application level. Why is it 13 seconds? Well, first of all, the big question, is that acceptable, right? Depends, right? Every business is different. Some of this might be acceptable. Some of it might be, whoa, hold on a second, right? This could be potentially a competitive situation and so on. So you want to start looking at these numbers here. However, here's the star of the show. The single user performance report. There is so much wonderful information in this that it's just impressive. If we look at this, it shows us the transactions, right? So in a typical performance script, you have transactions like speaker shop now. This is where I went into my shopping site and I clicked on a speaker. I clicked on the speaker image. I clicked on the tablet's image and so on and so forth, right? On the right-hand side, you have your letter grade. So I got a B grade for this, for the speaker's shop now, speaker's image. Let's talk about this one, right? The tablets show now. I'm going to drill down, and I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. The average now is a breakdown, and it basically says, hey, you look great for most of this stuff, right? You were taking advantage of content delivery networks for most of this stuff. For you just got a terrible score for the image size. Well, what about the image size? Well, basically it says, you served up a ton of images. Now, this is where the conversation gets interesting because, in our minds, 500K, 600K, that's nothing. Multiply that by several thousand, right? You're placing a heavy load, but even worse, and I've seen this where, an application will serve up the same PDF or the same document or the same image 10 or 15 different times. Why would you want to do that, right? Especially for your mobile device customers. Well, let's start drilling down a little bit more into this, right? I'm going to ask the obvious questions. Well, what is this thing talking about? What images? Well, here it is. Bam, directly, right? Remember, needle in the haystack. Let the machine do the work for us, right? So here is the problem. Well, what is the recommendation? The recommendation is, you're not serving this up from a content delivery network. CDNs, for those of you not familiar with a CDN, is a point location closer to your customer base so that the information doesn't have to travel as far. So what we're saying is, hey, you know what? These images are being served by your organization. They really should be closer to your customers. So when it comes time to download them and bring them in, there's not going to be as much lag time. Okay, great. Thanks for the explanation. There's also something about cookies here, right? Now, that is the recommendation, reduce the images. Now, I'm still going to ask, I'm going to be human here, right? I'm not the machine. I'm going to ask, well, what on earth is this thing talking about? Or better yet, I run to the developer in the hallways. Developer says, I have no, what are you talking about? What image? Well, here it is. So I'm going to click on that. Bam, there's the image, right? So this is, look at the size of this image. Now imagine serving this up on a 3G network, on a busy or slow 3G network, 10 times, right? So you're torturing your users slowly by serving up these images, right, on a constant basis. More importantly, though, you've changed the context of the conversation, because now performance takes on a new dimension, if you will. No longer is it a conversation about the back end, the database, the infrastructure. No, now it's a developer application. And remember, I might not have heard any complaints from this. You know, so far everything's great. You know, my users are giving the application a great thumbs up. However, there is room for improvement. Be the hero, right? Be proactive with your application. Everything else is just icing on the cake, right? Basically shows, well, give me the proof. What's the big deal about this, Julio? Well, the big deal is, you know, your users are sitting there waiting 3.39 seconds for a response to come back. That is an eternity in internet time, right? As I always like to joke around in a New York winter waiting for an Uber, you don't want to wait 3.39 seconds when you ask for a ride. So this is something very important. And then everything else, again, you know, additional information, headers, responses for the developer. So you can see there's so much information. How long did it take me to set this up, configure this? 30 seconds, because all I did was tell it, use this script, and this is what I want you to track. Everything else here in this particular screen is just things like that show you, well, how much of that traffic is images, right? So PNGs, quite a bit of it, right? Any errors? Nope, no errors. And great point, by the way, to say, you know, look, there's no errors. Does that mean I shouldn't do anything? No, not at all. You want to be proactive, right? And then some metrics regarding the endpoint and the traffic. Now, finally, right, one last point on this. We've been talking about traffic. We've been talking about the back end mostly, right? How, you know, connecting to a back end. What about the end user? What about what, you know, I see, what you see out there when you use an application? Well, for that, we have something called the web page test reports, right? Very simple concept. Once we reach peak load, in other words, the maximum number of virtual users that are going to run, we sample the traffic from 3 browsers, right? Based on location. So when I ran this test, you can tell that I used Ohio, Sao Paulo, North California, North Virginia, and then I used 3 browsers: Chrome, Firefox, IE11. Everything looks great. This is kind of borderline. That's why it's highlighted green, but everything else looks great. Oh boy, look at my North Virginia with IE, right? Now, this is a great opportunity, by the way, to start looking at and integrating and looking at other, you know, things that you might use to monitor. For example, first question I would ask is, how many of my users, right, if I'm using real user monitoring to keep an eye on who's using what, how many of my users are using IE11? Right? Because it's going to be a determining factor. Do I need to, you know, amass all the troops together, the development troops, and really start working on this thing and remediating this, or can this be something that can be pushed off a little bit? But when I drill down into this, once again, I'm torturing my users. I get a, you know, looking at those letter grades, I'm getting a big F. Effective use of CDN. I failed. I'm not using a CDN, right? Where am I spending my time? Well, the figures speak for themselves. I'm spending my time doing downloads. What am I downloading? Well, you saw I'm downloading images, right? Now, unless I'm a photo studio, do I really need to download that many images, right? Those are the kinds of questions. Everything else looks pretty much okay, right? DNS lookup, SSL negotiations, and so on. But this is from end user perspective. A big part of this is really, you know, having an impact on the application. Okay, so that's LoadRunner Cloud, and this is how we look at things from an end user and a backend perspective. Right now, I'd like to turn it over to Batar, who's going to talk to us a little bit more about performance engineering and the impact and how we can make things a little better for you. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Julio. I'm going to switch over my screen here, and hopefully you can see that now. Again, my name is Petar Paskarich, and I've been doing this a long time, maybe 1 or 2 years, maybe longer than Julio, but not that many more, since I started like in 1997, way back with the Mercury products as well. And today I'm going to basically, cover what he said about how did we do performance engineering amidst this global pandemic that we've had for the last basically year now. We're going to take a look at several main consideration topics, looking at speed to market, the whole remote working example that everyone's been under, providing global access anywhere, anytime, capacity of both your test environments and your actual production systems, SLA management, change management and what that meant to us, and then also some aspects about the workforce. All right, so this first topic on speed to market, when basically, at least for the large organization that you can search on that I currently work for, when COVID hit, we had to basically create a number of new applications for our customers and for some internal pieces that we had. So, stuff around the CARES Act, stuff around the Paycheck Protection Program, that kind of thing. So we were basically saying, within 2 weeks, we had to basically spin up entire new program areas for the bank. And that was quite stressful. But luckily, one of the things that we had at our disposal is there were several other applications in the toolbox that we could basically repurpose code and push those back through our CI/CD pipelines. So that was one of the great things. But with creating the apps, that meant there needed to be a whole new rush on actually testing all these new applications. Within our group, at least the subset across our 8 lines of business, there's essentially a engineer pool of about 50 engineers, specifically in the LoadRunner space, as well as JMeter and some other specialties. But we all basically got redeployed to quickly test all these new applications that were being built and spun up. Since our normal test pipelines and release schedules were all thrown out temporarily back then. And as different new, the new benefits and then the new checks that are coming from the government, that kind of stuff, as they've rolled out, we've had to also continue some of this where we've had to jump back into these programs over the course of the last year, at least twice, where we'd be testing applications for our mainframe, MQ servers, .NET applications and different things. For a normal release cycle, then all of a sudden, you're going to be pulled off, and for the next 3 weeks, you're going to be doing the CARES Act and trying to make sure that whole test phase goes properly. Well, new apps, new testing stuff. We also had to build out entire new infrastructures for a lot of these new application areas. Basically everything from load balancers to the front end web instances, back end MQ, databases, the whole gamut. But as part of supporting our remote workforce as well, we also had to very rapidly, basically quadruple in size our entire VPN infrastructure and the worldwide presence of our backbone switching environments. That was just an amazing time to see those projects spin up and how rapidly they came on. And actually, they've been working fairly flawlessly. I know a few other organizations around the world didn't have that luxury, and it was really hard to get them on. We've already covered reusing our previous code bases, and then, well, there's test requests that we had where we're going back and forth. Well, that led to lots of deployment and testing across these accelerated scheduling. And for us, that meant essentially constant work with our project managers and basically making sure everything in Jira was kept up to date and all of the work streams were basically accounted for. It was a pretty much a you must kind of situation. Make sure everything was in there, or else things would just get simply forgotten, and that's not good, because we'll cover that with some of the change management stuff here a couple slides later. All right, so we have these applications out there, but what happened? Basically March 23rd, 24th timeframe for a lot of us, we all became instant work from home users. Well, and that requires, at least for us, it literally was tens of thousands of people basically started work from home. We all were basically checking in at some point we were actually checking in on an hourly basis. Then eventually that moved to every 8 hours for basically shifts. Basically saying, do we have internet? Do we have access to our remote shares and our different remote apps that we need access to? And then for my group specifically, we were also looking at, okay, are the remote load generators actually still online and functional, depending on the different load that the enterprise was seeing. Again, that was all due to basically sporadic outages, per se, as we were expanding a lot of our backbones. So every now and then we'd lose a few things going offline just for various reasons. Let alone for the Texas event about 2.5 weeks ago, which is a whole different kind of situation for us remote workers. And I will cover that at the very end. Okay, so with this flood of remote workers, there's these, the service desk got inundated for about the first 2 months for us. And a lot of it was, it's not necessarily for tech workers working from home. It was a lot of our, say, field agents, different personnel that basically never had to work from home or really did work from home. They were actually in the office every day. They had their local desktops or their laptops at their desk that actually never went home. Now we were sending them home, or for the ones that didn't have the ability even from home to do remote Citrix logins or RDP for the desktops, well, we were flat out ordering them, multiple monitors, sometimes multiple laptops even, figuring out, do we get them remote connectivity, not just cable access, but looking at 4G Wi-Fi hotspots, that kind of thing, just to make sure everybody was up and available. Well, you got tickets for just that kind of setup, but then you're also looking at, okay, not everyone has the capability or had the experience of setting up networking at home for the first time either, as well as our enterprise side. So there were a lot of tickets being generated for our support desk around, how do I remotely attach to a system? How do we get our NAS shares back? It worked from my desk, but doesn't work from home. Or, oh, why does VPN all of a sudden not connect like it should? We're missing packets, or the connection only works for 10 minutes then quits, stuff like that. With that environment, as part of one of the things where our performance engineering group, working as essentially a fungible service, as a consultancy within the enterprise organization, we actually were able to essentially jump onto a lot of the help desk lines and actually help other parts of our enterprise actually service these tickets and help everybody out during that first basically 2 months of the transition period. It was kind of neat. So we were doing testing and we were doing help desk support, and we were helping people just get things done. I think we already touched on the next one, the hardware and software deployments at scale. There were points where we were ordering basically 100,000 monitors at a clip just to get them out the door to everybody. Since the normal designation for, at least for developers per se, is a laptop plus 2 monitors or 3 monitors in some cases. It also goes for different, say, stock trading agents, that kind of thing, where they're doing multiple monitors to make sure they can track everything from home as well. And then finally, on the remote work side, we had, as managers and senior leadership, how do we handle morale and communications with everybody? Since a lot of our organization was very hands-on, and we were a site where we were work on site motivated, and set that up for collaboration, and all of our our communication styles were really keyed around the daily walkarounds, being in touch with all of our staff throughout the day, not just the morning touch base meetings, that kind of thing, for part of the agile processes that we're all part of. But coming up with how do we handle employee engagement, just little blips throughout the day, whether it's little trivia. We had lots of like trivia contests. We had things where you could submit pictures of your home offices or different things that you were doing to help combat the stress in your life caused by COVID in general. Stuff like, you see, like, behind me, this is basically my office and computer room, but I also have a vast collection of vintage computing and Apple II and Macintosh kind of things, hobbies going on. So I'm sure I've had more pictures of my my lab out there than I probably really wanted to because of COVID, but it was kind of fun. Then you'd win stuff like different points for our employee reward system, or different little stickers and things. It was kind of fun. And that was one way just to keep the staff motivated, just not just staring at the wall all day or the computer screen. Again, next, we had to provide support for basically everyone anywhere, and that needed to have set up and say our remote network infrastructure basically, well, over a 2-week period, literally quadrupled in size from where we had before. And quadrupling in size for an enterprise of our scale is on the order of supporting basically on the order of 500,000 simultaneous connections into the front ends on those VPN concentrators. So it was an amazing upgrade that we pulled off. Again, that requires a capacity surge at our head ends. So all of our peering partners with the major basically internet providers, cable providers, even the telephony providers that we had in place for everything. A lot of those contracts were renegotiated and increased in order to handle that. We also went through with our workforce a very quick overview of what services were allowed from home and what were going to be our standards. So things like, basically saying that, okay, Zoom would not work in our security tolerance, but WebEx would work just fine because that was one of our preferred partners to begin with. GoToMeeting was also used in some places as well. And then we also had Skype. Not only just the communications through those systems, but looking at our policies around, do we allow video across those links? And do we want to have more than 20 people in a meeting, or what is that limitation there, and who gets approvals to do that? And that was all set by our corporate policy teams, dealing with that, whether it's anything around our remote working policies of what are the time periods that are enforced on the VPN for token refreshes, certificate refreshes, that kind of thing. And then also, one of the other considerations we had for a remote workforce was, now that we're actually communicating from our home endpoints on, say, corporate laptops, corporate equipment, whatnot, what was actually allowed or not allowed. So things like, when tax time came around, how do you get your W-2s remotely when they're not being mailed and they're online only? Well, if you have security restrictions around, say, printing, you're gonna be stuck. So things like that had to be worked out and approved by multiple areas. All right. So then we have touched on a lot of it before, but the main stuff, we're looking at major, actually formal write-ups on our current capacity that had to be done for our server infrastructure, our application architecture and how we were supporting it, our network bandwidth that was being used or could be consumed. And that's where the network virtualization tooling came in extremely handy. And one thing I learned from that experience too was that if you're using these tools, don't let your tool masters tell you that they can't do the network virtualization piece because it costs extra money, because it just doesn't. It's part of what you've already paid for. And it's a huge help to see, just like what Julio already presented on, why are you running so slow, or why are you sucking up so much bandwidth compared to your peers? And then that leads into also, our network hardware capacity, which switches need to be upgraded to handle all this extra traffic. We're also looking at, say, our licensing for our workloads that we had on our stream. So whether you're looking at your own contracts from, say, with IBM, that was a big one. Say, make sure that you can actually reach the levels that you could get. And just as I'm saying on the screen here, we were looking at testing at 4x and 8x levels instead of our 1x load levels during that time period, because it was amazing on the amount of financial transactions that actually were hitting us, that literally once the work from home and like that COVID time hit, so about that March 23rd, 24th timeframe, right in that week, our load levels sustained even through today at nearly, it jumped to 4x immediately and then sustained for about 6 months. And we're just now rolling down to somewhere between 2 and 4x. It kind of spikes here and there. So it's just amazing the level that we had to just absorb. And luckily, since we had a strong performance group, we kind of knew where we were going to be, and which apps would actually have some issues and which ones would survive quite well. So that extra testing and having the planning and foresight really does pay off when you have some of these unprecedented timing events. One of the last pieces on capacity I want to talk about there is testing infrastructure. When you're actually looking at jumping to 4x and 8x loads for your testing, well, do your load generators support that? Sometimes it's not necessarily the CPU that you're looking at that spikes up, that you monitor during your tests on your local load generator as being, do you have the capacity to run the test? But sometimes it's actually more of looking at that OS, whether you're running on Linux load generators or Windows load generators, on how many threads you're actually trying to force down one particular infrastructure system. And then on top of that, if you're doing virtualized systems, say running those load generators under, whether it's under cloud, under multi-tenant hosting, or underneath ESX, VMware kind of situations, when you start piping that kind of load through your systems, are you going to affect someone else on the same host? Hopefully you're segregated, or are you affecting your own test because you're overdriving, whether it's threading CPU or memory overloads on those particular hosts? So you could get some false reporting back that way. So it's something to keep track of while you're testing as well. Toward the end, one of the things that we were learning too is, it's SLA management. We had it in the past and is part of our best practices list, but now pretty much they are required for all of the testing. So there are SLA targets defined for basically every business transaction that we're testing for. And you have to work with our business leads to figure out, what those targets really should be, so we can report against them, instead of our team being the bad guy saying, well, it's just slow. And then you get the pushback saying, well, it doesn't really matter. Yes, it does matter. You agreed to this. So how are we going to fix this and work as a partnership? And so, we update our min and max levels. What are the upper and lower control limits of the application areas? Looking at the application as well as the infrastructure it's running on. And then finally, validate against those new SLAs that were agreed upon, and then figure out if you do need to actually improve things or not. And I believe this is my last topic on this. This is one that kind of hit us toward the end after all of our rapid cycling, which is dealing with change management. Well, how do you balance making changes and providing the testing, the reporting, the justifications, and the validations for those changes when the changes basically need to be ASAP immediate? We need to push this into production now. Those kind of situations for your organization should actually be dealt with before crisis, if possible. It's just something it's really good to have. That way, when you can basically bolt all this into a Jira Agile process pipeline, you can basically use the tools to do that tracking and work for you, instead of being caught later with everyone in a giant blame game, which is what could happen in a lot of those cases. I'm gonna say, that the change tracking is essential. It's helpful to know what went in, and when a rollback is warranted in a system, because sometimes deployments don't go quite well and you need to roll them back. Well, that needs to all be tracked and an agreed upon process in order to roll that back successfully. Then you see some auditing around the process, and whatever tool you're using for your Agile pipelines and systems is all perfectly fine, or whether you throw it in through ALM or whatnot. And then finally, you can use that data for prediction of what those changes will actually affect down the line for different applications and different touch points. And I believe, we do have one more, sorry about that. We covered most of this stuff at the beginning, actually. But when you're dealing with your remote workforce, of which I've been now, many of you for the last year, going on a year and a half probably, as from the management side, especially, your employees and staff are not just resources. Something to just to keep in mind as far as we are people, we all have problems, and we're all dealing with work from home issues, whether that's family or housing issues. How do you conduct meetings in a room that you didn't plan on ever having a meeting in, that kind of thing. Taking care of emotional and physical well-being, whether that's through, say, more constant communication, but at least well-placed and meaningful communications. That's been a very important thing that we've done with our staff. Look for those effects of the pandemic on your staff, on your engineers, your friends, your people. Everybody is kind of reacted to it in multiple ways, from looking at signs for depression or signs of anxiety, fear, looking for that productivity drop off that comes from someone that normally is like one of your star players or something, and seeing, just actually seeing what's going on and trying to help them get through that. And whether your enterprise company, whatever, has, say, resources in place for the staff to actually use that to get some help.
Pitar,
and I think that's about it.
Yeah, sorry to cut you off, but I do want to be respectful of people's time.
No problem.
I do thought that perhaps, if everyone is okay, if you have to drop off, we understand. Maybe we can ask Ray to come on and just moderate 2 questions. Let's just pick 2. We do have several, so I want to assure the audience that if we don't get to them live, we will provide written answers to them. They'll be posted with the link in. So Ray, maybe if you want to come off mute and just maybe throw out 2 questions from the audience to Pitar or Julio, and then we'll just wrap up in the essence of time.
Okay, I'm on now. Hang on just a second. Let me get over to the questions real quickly. One question that Pitar alluded to, but I'd like to get an answer from Julio also. The network virtualization, is that included with the LoadRunner, or is it a separate purchase item?
That is included. So it's included, it's available for all three platforms. As long as you're on version 12.6 or later of LoadRunner, you'll have access to the network virtualization settings.
And just a sub question to that, how much setup is required for NV?
Not a lot. Most of it is configuration, determining, for the on-premise stuff like LoadRunner Professional and LoadRunner Enterprise, it's mostly about determining, how you want to install it. Do you want to install it locally so that you can attach it to a single script, or do you want to just have it on a load generator machine so that it has an impact on anything that's run from there? So it's mostly, it's all a configuration exercise, I should say.
Yeah, the longest part,
drag, drop.
I say the longest part is usually just actually setting it up the very first time as part of the options underneath LoadRunner.
Okay,
Yep, exactly.
Pitar, this makes it more of a question for you. How do you drive a combined load from both on-premise and remote users and mobile users?
Well, what I can't say is that I can't say that I've ever blended the two as far as saying like combining a LoadRunner Cloud and a LoadRunner Enterprise at the same time. But normally through, let's say, LoadRunner Enterprise, I've done it several times where we've had, our on-premise load generators, and for us that, say that would be running out of, say, Charlotte, North Carolina, or say our Texas facilities, depending on where the applications are hosted on which data center. But within Enterprise, you could basically pick separate load generator pools and say, I want to use some pools, just like Julio was doing with the other test setup. Whether you're doing AWS cloud instances or load generator pools, you just basically just have them defined ahead of time within LoadRunner Enterprise, and you just select them for your project. And as long as those pools are assigned to your project, you have access to them.
Just a sub question on that. As you've tested some of the mobile users out there, mobile device users, what are some of the benefits that you've seen to them, to those mobile users of doing that type of testing?
Honestly, the biggest benefit from doing the mobile testing side would be from, say, well, looking at those LoadRunner insights are huge for the development side to see why things are basically performing the way they are in your application on those devices, or at least simulated devices over that simulated bandwidth. But historically, what I've seen as a performance engineer is that for me, I get the most out of the fact that by testing with, say, the network virtualization at the lower rates, that actually has a huge effect on your bandwidth and your infrastructure and thread hold times on your infrastructure, your application servers themselves. One of the big case studies I've used over the years is the fact that there was another consultancy that I was good friends with that did a particular test for a very large credit card processor. And when they actually used the network virtualization piece for, say, 5% of their workload, when you're running at, say, 60,000 virtual users at a time coming in, when they added in that 5% load at, say, I think it was at the time it was a early 3G speed, that extra 5% held the threads across their back end basically an extra 5 or 6 seconds per transaction, and it basically brought down the entire processing center within 15 minutes. So it's stuff like, kind of like stuff like that is where I see the most value, is basically what do slow running transactions that are holding threads and context within your entire infrastructure, what does that do to your system as a whole? Because concurrency and simultaneous transaction levels will rise very rapidly when you're in those situations. And it's very helpful to know what that will do. And the only way to really know that is to put those long-running transactions through your system.
Great.
Ray, maybe just pick 2 questions. I know that most people have stayed on, but in the essence of maybe Mike or Sunil's or Gary's, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, I'm trying to get down to
Can you
the.
see it on the question?
Let's start with Mike's. Mike's question. Sorry,
Yes,
hang on
do you see it or do you need me to read it?
Yeah, could you read that while I readjust my screen, please?
Sure. So I think this is mainly for Julio. Julio, are there any new features or changes in this latest LoadRunner 2021 release that will significantly improve the functionality of LoadRunner?
There are a couple of things that I want to point out that they really came out in 2020, but things like the ability to create a scenario on the fly dynamically using YAML files. So instead of having, you want to execute a scenario from, let's say, a CI/CD pipeline, you don't have to have a pre-existing scenario. You can have just simply a YAML file that has the virtual users, the generators you want to use, the parameters, and use that as the basis to create a performance test on the fly. So that's one of the big one of the big items, along with LoadRunner Developer and the Dev Web protocol as well is new to these releases.
Okay, let's go next to Ron's question. On the NV Insights report, you have grades for the recommendations. Are these preset or configurable in case I want to change those for the grading and weights to represent my organization's priorities?
These are preset as part of the product, right? So these are based on industry, some industry metrics, standard metrics. So they are preset as part of the product. I don't think you can change them, but they're based on the on the metrics for mobile devices and for desktop devices.
Terry, do we have time for one more?
Why don't we go one more and then we'll wrap it up.
Okay, do we have the capability, this is from Sunil, do we have the capability to emulate the usage of this across mobile devices, across both major OS platforms, Android and iOS? And we need compatibility to emulate performance and stability issues across an iPad also. The application is a clinical environment application.
Yep. So definitely, that's the short answer. We do have a protocol that's mobile. It's made specifically for mobile devices. So that includes things like Android and iOS devices. Doesn't matter if it's a phone or a tablet. It's really more tied to the device. So we can using something, for example, True Client Mobile, you can hit a physical device. You can also hit an emulator, right? So an emulator to us is just like any other device. It's accessible in the same fashion. It's an application running on the device, and you can collect certain metrics from those devices as well.
And then he had an add-on to that, adding to the prior question. Their current user load exceeds 5K users, 5,000 users, and is expected to scale upward to the tune of 1,500 to 2K more users for 6,500 to 7,000. Do you see any issues with this?
Not at all. We are one of our claims to fame, especially on the LoadRunner cloud side. We've supported millions of virtual users.
Right.
It's a matter of having the right machines to do that. So in the case of LoadRunner Cloud, we provide those machines. We ramp up machines as the need arises, right? We reach a certain CPU usage, and then behind the scenes, we'll bring up another machine, and then that will host additional virtual users. On the on-premise side of things, it's really a matter of how much resources you have, right? So you can ramp up to thousands or millions of virtual users if you have the right number of machines.
Yeah,
So
there's like
scalability is not an issue.
Yeah, so I'd like to add into like for our particular group and our pools that we use of dedicated load generators, we're generally, our guideline is roughly basically 2,500 threads per load generator right now, and we still have plenty of room. So it's, yeah, going to your 7,000 should not be a problem.
Okay,
And
any
Ray,
last comments, Batar,
yeah,
on using that in a mobile environment?
Repeat that, please.
Any last comments or thoughts on when you're doing that for a mobile application in particular?
The only thing that I would add into is something I ran into recently, to where if you're having issues recording the actual mobile communications, if you can use, say, whether you're coming out of, if your application actually works within, say, a Google Chrome, using those HAR files is amazing. And then sometimes, even if you don't have that and you're looking at your device, sitting say like a Wireshark in between the environment, and there's proxies that you can do multiple ways for that mobile protocol, but using the Wireshark, ethereal, whatever, packet capture, importing that into the mobile protocol in VuGen is a lifesaver at times. That way you can get your scripts built rather quickly.
and Ray, if we can just do Gary's question and then we'll wrap it up. I know he wants to hear from Patar.
Oh.
Okay, here we go. Good.
Okay.
Oh.
I'm sorry. You were saying something, Terry?
No, I just didn't know if you saw it, if you're able to read that out.
Yes. How would you see your tool for testing performance on the app like GoToWebinar or Zoom? Most of your examples were against other web types of applications.
So if we're looking at, say, a video conferencing solution, or some kind of communications application, it can be done. It's a little tricky. A lot of how I've actually tested those kind of applications, per se, vary around doing a lot of pre-measurement of what are the expected, say, video rates and the streaming levels per endpoint, and then as well as looking at the payload design of the calls that, say, like a Zoom or a WebEx would actually be using back to those endpoint systems, and then basically just doing a hybrid model of those two together, of having basically resources hosted somewhere that actually act as those video and audio streams, and then you can use the LoadRunner AV protocols to actually pull some of that off in order to guarantee that you're getting, say, like a 3 megabit per second stream coming in, and whatnot. So it's kind of, you're modeling it. So I haven't found a perfect solution to do it yet, at least on the scripting side. Could possibly be done with True Client or maybe True Web, depending on how you bridge that together. But that's my current answer. And working a lot with the network teams just to make sure everything's, matching up to the model.
Great.
Julio, do you have any ideas on that?
I do. It is certainly challenging, right? Because of the whole, I guess you could say, dynamics of how things interact, right? So there's a video or a meeting or sound and voice and all these things to take into consideration. So typically, at least from my experience, it's been something that is a combination of a script, recording and playing back in the traditional sense, and then maybe an API call, right? So for example, Microsoft uses, there's a Microsoft Graph API that they use for Office 365. So we might have to get hooks into something like that to go the extra mile and maybe, join a meeting and things like that. If not, it just turns into something very difficult, because then you're literally dealing with bits and bytes, TCP and UDP traffic, which is all WinSocket, which of course is all buffers, and I have nightmares just thinking about it.
Agreed.
Okay, let me wrap up with a few admin things here real quick. I just wanted to let everyone know that the virtual community days recordings for the Vivid virtual community days are now, for Agile, DevOps, and testing, are now available online through the Vivid website. So please take advantage of those. The other thing that we wanted to mention is the Micro Focus Universe 2021 is coming on March 23rd and 24th. It will be totally virtual, and one unique thing about this is, as opposed to many others that are out there, they will actually have 3 separate running tracks so that you can view the sessions in your time zone. You will not have to try to translate what time zone you're in to when the session is actually occurring. They will have separate tracks for each of 3 time zones across the US, and it'll be easy to attend. You get to see the newest developments in products, plus roadmaps for the products, talk to other users who have had great experiences, much like Pitar, and some of the things that they have learned along the way. Great sessions to attend if you get a chance to do that on the 23rd and 24th. Please plan for that. Last, I think you got the contact information for Julio and Pitar. Julio is Julio, that's JULIO .ARTEAGA at microfocus.com. Pitar is PPUSKARI at hotmail.com. And if you want to reach me, I'm at Ray at ideliver-inc.com. And also feel free to visit the Microfocus community website. Too long to state here, but look for the recording to be emailed to you, the link to the recording to be emailed to you in the next week. And in the next week to 10 days, the recording of this webinar will be on the Vivid site. Thanks everybody for attending, and please take a moment to fill out the survey at the end here, so that as you exit the event, so that we can better serve you in the future. Thanks for your time. We appreciate you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, thank you.